I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. People all over the world have been drinking tea for thousands and thousands of years, and for good reason. There's plenty of evidence that drinking tea on a regular basis can have a lasting impact on our wellness. In today's podcast, I am joined by tea expert Mimsie Ladner. She and I will be diving into the surprising world of tea, going far beyond antioxidants. In addition to covering the hidden health benefits of tea, we'll also take a fascinating look inside the history of tea and surprising little-known facts like what's the best type of tea to buy, do's and don'ts when it comes to brewing or steeping your best cup of tea, even what to put in it and what not to put in it for maximum health benefits. So, as you'll hear us talking about, there are four main types of true teas. There's white, green, oolong, and black. And of course, green tea gets a lot of the hype for health benefits, but as you'll hear, white is crazy high in antioxidants as well. Black tea here in the US is probably the most common. That's what, if you're going to a restaurant and you just get regular iced tea, that's black tea. So when we look at the four main types of true tea, white, green, oolong, and black, all of these are rich in polyphenols, flavonoids, antioxidants, basically, that have been shown to support heart health by reducing bad cholesterol, helping with blood clotting, also supporting healthy blood pressure, triglycerides. And studies have linked all of these types of tea to a reduction in risk for certain types of cancer, type 2 diabetes, combating inflammation, and supporting a healthy immune system. And tea of all types is rich in L-theanine. L-theanine is an amino acid that has a lot of benefits, including reduction or potential reduction in anxiety. It also helps to increase our alertness and our attention. So we'll also be covering herbal teas. And while herbal teas aren't true teas, and we'll talk about why, they do typically contain a blend of herbs, spices, fruits, or other plants. They don't contain caffeine, which makes them a fantastic option for hydration and all-day sipping. There's a bunch, tons and tons of types of herbal teas. All have their own unique benefits, ranging from improved blood pressure to better sleep to decreased inflammation, improved joint pain. And we'll be talking about all of these today. So I would like to welcome our guest, Mimsie Ladner, founder and owner of Gachi, a tea company that specializes in artisan crafted tea sourced directly from small farms throughout the world. So welcome, Mimsie. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Molly. I'm honored to be joining you.
So before we get into tea, and we'll share with our listeners a lot about, there's so much surprising information about tea beyond just what we think of, it's high in antioxidants. But before we even get into all the different things that we'll be sharing with our listeners, let's talk about you and your background and how you started Gachi, because this is or tell us first, I guess, about Gachi and how this got started. Had you ever done anything like this before?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, Gachi is a specialty tea company. And so my story kind of dates back about 10 years when I graduated from college and had this wanderlust and just decided to pick up and move across the world from my small town of Bay St. Louis, Mississippi to Seoul, South Korea. And really ended up there on a whim, just with an interest about learning about new cultures and meeting new people. And so when I moved to Korea, I started falling in love with the various aspects of culture there, including tea. And the more I started traveling around Korea and other tea growing regions and countries nearby, it became a hobby of mine. And so I knew that I always wanted to do something in tea going forward. And the more I was traveling, the more I had the opportunity to meet these growers that have been for generations growing tea. And so really got to experience what a good cup of tea tasted like. And when I moved back to America about 2 years ago, I decided that I wanted to bring those really special teas that have been grown by these farmers on these small farms to America.
And you were in a position to actually make it a reality because you had established, you knew them. And I would imagine with some, you visited them multiple times and had established a relationship with them. So then
Yes.
did you reach out? How did you get it started? And we should say too, your background is in PR and communications. It's not in the food industry at all.
Correct. Yeah. So this was a totally new world for me, and it was based more on a passion than, anything else. But, like I said, every chance that I had while I was working and living in Korea and other parts of Asia as well, I took those opportunities to visit these small farms and to get to know these growers, on a person-to-person basis. I just feel like we have become so far removed from the food supply chain, essentially. So, when we are eating something or drinking a cup of tea, we don't really think about the work that goes into producing that. And so, yes, I had the opportunity to go to these different tea farms, meet these people, see exactly how these teas were being made and how much passion these individuals had. So throughout the years, I established these relationships with these growers. Many of them I kept in touch with. And so when I moved back and I started Gachi, it was a very easy transition for me because I had established those contacts. I knew which teas I loved and which teas I thought everyone else would love as well. So
and tell us what
that happened.
Tell us what Gachi means.
So Gachi is the Korean word for together. I spent about 9 years living in Korea, so it's a culture that's very near and dear to my heart. But the thing that I love most about tea and about tea culture is that no matter where you go in the world, there is some sort of tea culture that exists. Tea brings people together. So whether it's through an act of hospitality or as a means to do business, it's a glue. And so it helps to bring people closer together. So I wanted to use the Korean word for together to essentially be what the concept of my business is all about.
And so you contacted these companies or these farmers, communicated with them that you're, starting this company and started importing the tea sourced directly from them. And then you obviously, did you design your branding and how did you decide on all this and the containers? I mean, because I'll include the link to the website, but if you wanted to say it for our listeners.
GachiTea.com.
GachiTea.com. So GachiTea, but we'll include it in our episode notes. And we should also mention Gachi Tea is offering free shipping for our listeners. Just enter the code FUELED at checkout. So thank you for that. But if you take a look, it's beautifully packaged. Everything about it is just, it brings you peace. It's just when you look at the product and you look at the branding and the marketing of it, it makes you want to sip this tea. So how did that all come together from just even the containers to the branding?
Sure. Well, thank you for your kind words. As you mentioned, my background is in marketing. And, I personally love minimalist designs. And so I really wanted to bring that into the branding aspect of it. But at the same time, the teas that I do sell from these small scale farms, they're so beautiful and they're so special. And so I really wanted to convey that through the packaging. And in addition to that, all of the teas come packaged in environmentally friendly containers. So they all come packaged in stainless steel tins, which, not only help to preserve the tea and keep it stored properly, but it also helps to reduce waste.
So with that and kind of going into the the conversation around tea. As you said, around the world, tea is, a tool for togetherness, the glue that brings us all together. And tea is the second most consumed beverage in the world after water. Talk to us about true tea and what makes it true tea versus herbal teas and kind of the big picture overview of this.
Sure. So in the Western world, we have come to use tea as an umbrella term for anything that can be steeped in hot water. But in the tea world, the term tea is used to describe the leaf that comes from the Camellia sinensis plant. So that is a plant that grows all across the world, namely in China, but that is the plant that's used to create white tea, green tea, oolong tea, black tea. And basically what differentiates those types of tea is the process. So all of those teas come from one leaf. That said, anything else that can be steeped in hot water is referred to as an herbal tea or a tisane. So types of herbal teas that you might be familiar with are floral teas, so things like rose and lavender, or perhaps a spice tea or even a fruit tea. So those are quite different, but for all intents and purposes, we can just use the word tea to refer to all of these things.
So when we're at the coffee shop and someone orders a passion fruit tea, it's really more of an herbal infusion or a tisane, as you said, which I always called it tisane. It's spelled Tisanes. So I'm glad you said it first, not me, because I would have completely... That's one of those, I see it on menus and I have probably said it at a restaurant or a coffee shop to someone. I'll take the, chamomile tisane.
Sure.
But yeah, so the tisanes or herbal tea, and you'll see it, or herbal infusion. When we're talking in a bit about, health benefits of tea, those are typically not going to be in there. So for our listeners, if you've been drinking your, peppermint tea or chamomile tea, there's other benefits of it, but it doesn't have maybe the antioxidants that we'll be talking about with the white or the green. And so you were talking about that it's available throughout the world. And one of the things that you shared with me that I was really surprised, tea, some of the largest producers of tea are, places like China, India, but it's around the world, but even here in Louisiana and in Mississippi. So tell us about that. And I guess some of these locations and why we're starting to see more.
That's right. So about 99% of the tea that we consume here in America is actually imported. So like you said, China, India, Kenya, these countries are huge producers of tea. But as tea is becoming increasingly more popular, other countries are looking to get in on the action. So as you mentioned, we are growing tea here in America in places like Hawaii, as well as here in the South. And that's because the climate is perfect for growing tea. That said, it's still relatively new. And so, American tea farmers are sort of learning their ways around growing tea and finessing and perfecting their processes. But it is becoming increasingly popular and more of an interest here.
And you said that you even have a guy that you know here in New Orleans who's growing tea in his garden.
Yes. So I sell a lot of Gachi's teas at festivals and markets throughout the city. Not so much right now because of the coronavirus, but I had the pleasure of meeting a tea enthusiast at the Frette Street Market here in New Orleans. And he invited me to his house to have tea, and his tea garden is just incredible. He's been growing tea at his home in Uptown New Orleans for about 20 years and makes his own tea as well. So it's quite unique. It's becoming a more popular hobby.
I bet that was like a really interesting experience,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, it kind of goes back to the fact that tea really does bring people together. So, complete strangers, even, we instantly had something to talk about and, a shared passion. So very much a cool experience and still friends to this day.
And talk to us about what it takes to make tea, because for him to make the tea from his garden and make enough of it for you guys to share, you said it takes like a couple of thousand little tiny tea leaves to make a pound of finished tea.
That's correct. And so he actually kind of joked because, he had just a small amount of tea leaves, but he called it the entire year's harvest, and so he's really only able to get a very small amount, maybe a few cups from this plant and a few cups from this plant.
You're really fortunate that he offered you some. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So lucky. So honored for sure.
I have this blueberry bush that we now have in our backyard, and my husband calls it that. It's the harvest, and it'll be like 6 berries. And we had his family over last weekend, and I said, "Oh wait, I have one blueberry for everybody."
I love it.
He said, "This is her harvest of the week." So yeah, so it takes a lot of tea leaves, 2,000 leaves, to make just a single pound of tea. And so for that reason too, it's one of the things that you keep in mind as you're looking at where you're sourcing it is, how do these farms operate? How are the workers treated? What are the social issues there or not? And so that all goes into the process of where you've decided to source what you're bringing in.
Absolutely. So most of the tea that we consume here in America and around the world as well is mass produced on very large, what a lot of people refer to as factory farms. And so, a lot of times in order to get the highest yields on these farms, there are a lot of fertilizers and pesticides and insecticides used. And, a lot of times these places are more concerned about making a profit. And so the tea workers are a lot of times not getting paid what they're supposed to be getting paid. And they're working in really squalid conditions. And this is actually an issue that is plaguing the tea industry. And so, if you think about it, you go into a grocery store and you buy a box of tea or a tin of tea for $4 or $5. Something really interesting is that only less than 1% of the profits made from that tea are actually going back into the pockets of the workers. So it's a very, very minimal amount, just a few cents. So, it's a big issue. It's a really big issue. So keeping that in mind and understanding the backbreaking work that goes into tea production and harvesting tea, I really wanted to make sure that the teas that I'm selling are sourced directly from farms that I've visited myself. So I know what the working conditions are like, what is being used to grow the tea. And, the people that I'm working with, they're just so passionate. This is an art for them. This is, not the most profitable work, but it's something that makes them happy. And knowing that other people are enjoying their tea is something really great for them.
And on a similar note of, one of the things that sets it apart of what you're bringing in and also other tea companies that you support that do a similar approach, you're not going to see a bag inside of the can. You don't have the multiple bags. It is loose leaf tea. And I think a lot of people don't really know what to do with that sometimes because we're so used to tea being, like you said, it's mass produced, it's sold in these bags. And there's a bunch of different reasons not to have this. So tell us why, because this was, I think maybe some people are aware of this. This was, a lot of this was new to me that I wasn't aware of just how different and low quality it is for the most part if we're seeing tea inside of the bags.
That's right. So this commercially produced tea oftentimes is very low quality. So not only is it not being produced in the best types of conditions, but a lot of times it's including only the lowest grade of the tea. And so, a good quality whole leaf tea is going to be using the young tea leaves, the bud, so the unopened tea leaves. And that's really where the health benefits come in. That's where the flavor is. But a lot of these teas that are mass produced only containing what we in the tea world call fannings or the dust. So very low quality tea leaves. And a lot of times it's basically just the dust of what's left over from the better leaves. And so that is coming in the tea bags, which, in addition to the fact that it's very low quality tea, if you're drinking this, you're not going to be getting the health benefits. You're not going to be getting the good flavors that you'd be getting with other higher quality whole leaf teas. But the tea bags themselves, there have been a lot of studies in recent years that show that tea bags have millions and millions of microplastics in them. And so when we're making a cup of tea with tea in a tea bag, those microplastics are being, leached into the tea that we're drinking, and that's going into our bodies. So it's terrible for our health. It's terrible for the environment because it's additional waste. So I always recommend to people to avoid the tea bags as much as possible. And then the last thing, and this is coming from a purely foodie perspective, is when you're brewing tea in a tea bag, especially if it's a whole leaf tea, which a lot of times bag teas are not. But even if you're using a tea filter to brew your whole leaf tea in, the tea bag is actually going to be constricting the tea leaf. So it's not able to open up properly. Therefore, you're not able to taste all of the complexities, the nuances and flavors of the tea.
So if someone is going to go the route that you would recommend, that would mean that they're going to buy what's referred to as loose leaf tea. And tell us how to steep it, how to, there's different options, and kind of walk us through what those are. And visually, if possible, if someone isn't familiar with what that looks like.
Sure. So there are, as you mentioned, a variety of ways that you can brew loose leaf tea. So if you're a tea person or you really want to delve into learning more about tea, I do recommend purchasing a teapot. You can find an affordable teapot at a variety of stores. Keep in mind when you are looking for a teapot, the easiest ones to use come with a tea basket inside of it. So that way you don't even really have to filter out the tea. It's basically a fine mesh stainless steel tea basket. So when you add the leaves into the pot and then add the water, it's just going to be filtered out when you pour it. If you're not quite ready to make that investment to purchase a teapot, you can purchase what is called a tea infusion basket. And it's very similar to the basket that goes inside the teapot that I just mentioned. This usually stainless steel tea basket just slips right into your mug or your teacup, and it can be washed very easily. But the great thing about these baskets, not only do they allow the tea leaves to fully expand so you can enjoy a more flavorful cup of tea, but if you are brewing whole leaf tea, then you can actually get multiple infusions from the same tea leaves. So with a tea bag, you might brew it once and throw it away. But with a nice quality whole leaf tea, you can use these tea baskets to brew tea from the same leaves 4, 5, 6 times.
So don't be afraid of it. Don't be, turned off if it's not something that you're familiar with or you haven't used tea in this way. And having something like the basket or the little infusion ball, the little stainless steel, these are easy to find. And it's something that you have some on your website, but it's also, someone could look online or find it at a specialty tea store, but you don't have to look hard. You can do a quick Google search and you would be able to find it. And it's something that, again, you're reusing this over and over and over. So there's a lot less waste. And talking about kind of the history of tea, there's so much there. But we were talking about the bags and the bag for tea. You say it was an accident how this came about, that it wasn't even intended.
That's right. Yeah. The invention of the tea bag was an accident. And back in the early 1900s, I believe it was somewhere around 1904, 1905, there was an American tea merchant named Thomas Sullivan. And when he was passing out samples of tea to clients and potential clients, he had put the tea leaves in little mesh bags, and not knowing that his clients were going to put the bag in their cup of water. And so thus the tea bag was born.
And I know you have tons. You have so much about the history of tea. But what are some of your, I guess, favorite anecdotes? There's a lot of legends or myths maybe about how tea came to be, but what are some of your favorites?
Sure. Well, of all of the legends, one of my favorite involves a Chinese monk who, was on his journey to find enlightenment. And with Buddhism, in order to reach that enlightenment, you have to continuously meditate. And for anyone that's ever tried to meditate, you probably know that it's not an easy thing to do. And so as this monk, 4,000 years ago, was attempting to meditate, he found that he kept falling asleep. And so he woke up once from his nap, and he was so angry at himself, and this is a little grotesque, but legend has it that he tore his eyelids right off and then tossed them on the ground, and then in their spot grew the first tea plants. And then this magical plant allowed him to have the focus that he needed to continue meditating. So.
And stay awake, but he still was eyelidless.
That's right. So yeah, definitely a big grotesque, but an interesting legend nonetheless.
I like it. And talk to us about the different cultures or preparations around the world, like how we prepare tea here, in the Western world varies. Even if it's the same tea, typically how we're preparing it is very different than, say, in China.
Sure. So, lots of different brewing methods around the world. When tea was first consumed back in China, it was actually steamed and pressed into cakes and bricks that, interestingly enough, were even used as currency for a while. But then they began evolving their brewing process. At a certain point, tea leaves were ground into a fine powder, which was then mixed with water. If you're familiar with matcha and how matcha is prepared, it's very similar to that. And actually, the Japanese learned of those brewing methods from the Chinese. And so that's one way. And then another interesting Chinese method of brewing tea is called Kung Fu brewing. So you hear Kung Fu, and the first thing you might think of is Jackie Chan. But it's actually a Chinese term that means to practice anything to essentially become better at it and to become more artful. And so this includes the practice of brewing tea. So whereas in the West, we'll often, have just a small bit of tea leaves and we'll use a larger amount of water to brew them. In China, they will use a considerable amount of tea leaves, maybe 4 or 5 times the amount of tea leaves that we use here, and less water. And so this essentially allows the tea to be more flavorful and more complex. And then again, you're able to get many more infusions out of the same leaves. So I visited China a few times on my tea sourcing trips and traveling as well. And it's incredible because you can walk around these little areas where tea is grown and you see people drinking tea all day. They sit around, they might start brewing some leaves in the morning, and they'll continue to brew those leaves throughout the day as, friends come over, family comes over. So yeah, certainly lots of different brewing methods around the world.
I'd like to pause for a minute to talk about Nutrafol, our sponsor for this week's podcast episode. So Nutrafol is designed to support the growth of thicker, fuller, healthier hair from the inside out. So y'all have heard me say before that when it comes to skin and hair care, I am a huge rules follower. I'm very consistent and I follow the specific recommendations of my dermatologist. So when I first learned about Nutrafol, the first thing I did was reach out to her to get her feedback on it. And she said not only does she recommend this product to her patients, she takes it herself. So Nutrafol, it's a nutritional supplement. It's made with potent botanicals. It's 100% drug-free. And Think of it like this. In addition to the things that we can do that we have in our control, like backing off of damaging styling tools and heat and chemicals, supplementing with Nutrafol helps to support healthier hair from within. So it is possible to grow thicker, stronger hair. And you can also show support for our show, this podcast here, by going to Nutrafol. Check out their website, Nutrafol.com. Use the promo code FUELED to get 20% off. And this is the best offer that they have available anywhere, plus free shipping on every order. So 20% off at Nutrafol.com using the promo code FUELED. Again, best offer anywhere, 20% off at Nutrafol.com. It's Nutrafol.com, promo code FUEL for hair as strong as you are. So shifting gears a bit to talk about the health benefits of tea. This is something that you've told me that when you're sampling out Gachi, or used to be able to sample out Gachi, or at markets, or talking with people, you'll get a lot of questions about specific health benefits. And it sounds like people are kind of like, well, what can I drink for fill in the blank ailment they might have? Do you think that sometimes people's expectations are too great for what the beverage of tea can give them?
Well, it's really interesting with how marketing in the food industry is carried out these days. And I know you did a podcast episode on this recently. But yeah, people might see a study or an article or something pop up, and they see tea touted as an all healing superfood. And so, immediately they might think that it's an instant fix, which isn't really the case. But yeah, I do get a lot of questions from people asking specifically, what can I drink for improving my diabetes, or what kind of tea can I drink to lose weight? So people are certainly looking for tea that is functional.
And one of the things that you and I've talked about before too is, it's kind of like anything in our wellness and nutrition realm. That, like you said, there's marketing, there's a lot of hype around it. There may be this, one study that media picks up and it gets a lot of airtime. And then people see that and they think, oh, if I drink tea, like it will help control my diabetes. Well, it may, if you're doing it in place of maybe these other beverages that you're drinking. You do it in place of the sugary drinks, and you also change other things in your diet, but you're not doing fast food, you're not doing the cookies, chips, soft drink route. But to think, and I think a lot of times in the US, we have this mentality, I have this issue, I will add this product, it will fix it, and it's really not that. It's really, it's one more tool in the arsenal of wellness that we can bring into our lives.
Definitely. Because, there's so much more that we need to learn about tea. There have been plenty of studies that have been done, but in my personal opinion, I feel like there's not enough to be able to say that tea definitively is going to make you a healthier person. Like you said, it is a tool. But you have to be looking at other parts of your life and improving, your diet, maintaining a regular exercise schedule, all these things. That said, tea is packed with natural antioxidants that have been shown to improve health. Yes, green tea might be shown to improve certain conditions where white tea is more helpful for other conditions. But usually what I tell people is, just find a tea that you like. Find a tea that tastes good. Because, if you drink green tea and you don't like it, then you're going to be turned off by other teas as well. So explore, find something that you like. That way it becomes easier for you to maintain the habit of drinking it.
And let's talk about the different types now. I think this is a good time. So when we're talking about tea and we think about health benefits of tea, I think everyone's mind first goes to green tea. Because again, there has been a lot of research there. That's where we see the most reports on it. And there are really strong health benefits associated with drinking green tea. So tell us about the differences between white, green, oolong, and black tea. They're all from the same plant, as you said, but tell us how they're different, how they're processed, and we can kind of talk a little bit about the antioxidant content and health benefits of each too as we go.
So white tea, as you mentioned, is the least processed of all the teas. Essentially, when a grower is making white tea, they will pick the tea and then leave it in the sun to wither and dry. So because of that, when you infuse white tea, it has a really lovely light color and a very delicate light flavor profile. So because it is the least processed of all of the teas, it's said to contain the most antioxidants. A lot of people think that white tea is the least caffeinated as well among all the teas. But interestingly, again, because it has not been processed very much, that it does actually contain quite a bit of caffeine.
So it's a great coffee alternative for those who are looking for that lift and they want the caffeine, but maybe not quite so much as coffee. So it can kind of be a nice little step down.
Yes. If you're strictly looking for caffeine, I find that a lot of people that are looking for a potential coffee alternative do tend to like something bolder in taste because coffee is so bold.
Mm-hmm. So this would be a little more mild.
Exactly.
And you have two types of white tea that you offer through Gachi. One I think is really interesting. It's little stars that are like the tea buds are tied into these tiny little clusters that look like little stars.
That's right. Yeah. So a lot of white teas will often just incorporate the bud, or what I like to refer to as the baby leaves, the unopened leaves, which are the most flavorful part of the tea plant. And then, the top 2 or 3 leaves, which are also very flavorful. But yes, the Aquarius tea stars are a very special white tea from Sri Lanka, which is interesting because not many white teas are produced in Sri Lanka. But these have all been handpicked on this incredible farm in the Uva Highlands of Sri Lanka, and they have all been crafted and hand tied into these beautiful stars that, in my opinion, are best served in a champagne glass. Way that you can really enjoy not only the flavors, but also the appearance of the tea.
And also, as you're listening, and if you go to Gachi Tea and you're looking at these different teas that Mimsie is sharing about, she also does a really great job of kind of talking about the flavor notes and so what to expect with it. So it's also just a really fun read as you go through there, and you can learn a lot. And she has images of each, so you can kind of see what those little clusters of tea stars look like. So moving from white tea to green tea, kind of if we're looking at in terms of level of processing. So green tea has been tell us about that, how that's different from white tea and also in comparison to black and oolong.
Sure. So, we talked about oxidation, right? And if you think about an avocado, for example, if you cut an avocado and you leave it out, over time, it's going to be getting browner and browner, which is essentially what happens with tea as well. Green tea is not oxidized at all. So it depends on which country you purchase your tea from, because different countries have different processing methods to make green tea. So in China, the green tea will be pan fried to halt the oxidation, whereas in Japan, they'll tend to use a steaming process to halt the oxidation. So that also changes the flavors as well. But again, because it's not as processed as, say, an oolong or a black tea, you're still going to be getting a good amount of the antioxidants, the caffeine, and the flavor a lot of times is going to be very vegetal. And so for some people, the grassy flavors aren't necessarily what they're used to. And so it is a bit of an acquired taste for some. But it's a great tea.
And with Gachi, you have a lot of different options of green tea. And talk to us about matcha because you have a matcha with Gachi, but talk to us about matcha and how this is a type of a green tea, but it's very different than other types of green tea.
So, a lot of green teas in Japan are grown in full sunlight, but matcha is actually shaded a few weeks before it's harvested. And so, because of that shading, it forces the tea leaves to produce more chlorophyll because they're not getting their energy from the sun. And so, because of that, matcha takes on this really beautiful emerald color. So most green teas, loose leaf green teas, we make an infusion by steeping the leaves in the water, and then we will remove the tea leaves before we drink the infusion. With matcha, on the other hand, matcha is, as you mentioned, also a green tea, but rather than steeping the tea leaves are actually ground into a fine powder, and we then mix that with water and drink it that way. So we are essentially drinking the entire leaf. So because of that, we are getting higher concentrations of antioxidants. I've read some studies that say a serving of matcha has about 10 times the antioxidant content than a regular cup of green tea. You're also getting an extra boost of caffeine. So, if you have a small little shot of matcha, you'll definitely be feeling it for a while. But another component that is in high concentrations in matcha is L-theanine. And L-theanine is a natural component in all tea. But again, because you are drinking a concentrated dose of tea, you're drinking the whole tea leaf, you are getting more of that component as well. And so that essentially works with the caffeine to provide an energy boost that's very focused. So if you're drinking matcha or green tea or any tea for that matter, that chemical component is going to keep you from experiencing a caffeine crash or the jitters that you might get if you're drinking coffee, for example.
So when we look at health benefits of tea in general, it can be a nice replacer for coffee. And unlike coffee, which might leave us feeling jittery or our heart racing or having that crash, thinking of something like the boost that we get from tea of being that lasting, sustained energy and focus.
That's right. Which is why, matcha has played such a big role in Buddhism. And even, people who practice meditation today turn to that because it does help you maintain your energy, but it keeps it very focused.
And matcha is something we've talked about before on this podcast. I did an interview with Dr. Andrew Weil, and he has been a matcha advocate for decades. And so it's a beautiful green hue. If you're not familiar with it, it's just a really interesting tea to experiment with. And Mimsie, let me ask you this. So we're talking about when you said green tea, and it can be kind of a flavor that might take some getting used to for people. How do you feel about if someone kind of did halvesies, for example? So if they took an herbal tea that they really like the flavor of, say, one of your lemongrass herbal teas, and mixed that with a green tea and felt like, adding that to it helped them with the flavor of it. Is that something that thumbs up, or would there be a reason you would say not to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's just about finding what works for you and, your flavor preferences. So yeah, definitely experimenting. I love encouraging people to try their own blends of tea at home, even if, there's a spice maybe that you want to add to it. Okay. With matcha in particular, matcha lattes have become quite popular these days. So I do recommend, if the flavor of matcha in particular is too bold, adding a bit of milk can help to round out those flavors. I usually do recommend using a non-dairy milk because cow's milk does have a protein in it that inhibits the absorption of antioxidants. So if you'd like to be getting the health benefits from the matcha as well, consider using an almond milk or a cashew milk or a coconut milk to sort of round out those flavors.
My husband has been loving his matcha latte that he does with the frother, and he'll do the unsweetened coconut milk as the milk in there. And that's kind of like his afternoon pick me up. And it was really funny because he first had one at a coffee shop and he loved it. And then he looked up let's be honest, I looked up the nutrition facts of it. He said it didn't, he was going on and on about the flavor of it. And then he ordered some matcha tea because he wanted to start making it at home. And then when he made he's like, wow, this is so different than what I had. I said, I have a feeling what you had at the coffee shop had like a lot of sugar. So we pull it up, just the Starbucks matcha green tea. And it was just, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was like 2 days worth of added sugar in there. And I was like, that's how they lure people in. But it worked because he tasted it. He really liked it. He got some, and then, he had to kind of experiment with it a little bit, but he's been making that and kind of found a way that he likes it. So, and using something like the vanilla unsweetened coconut milk or almond milk can help add a little bit of that sweetness to it. And that's also interesting about just the small things that we don't even think about. Switching what we add to our milk can make a big difference. Or you've also said before that adding something like a squeeze of lemon might help with the flavor, but it can also bring out the green tea's antioxidants, making it more available for us to absorb. And that might be sufficient for you. You might not need to add milk then if you did a squeeze of the lemon.
That's right. And, I talk to a lot of my clients, and, the teas that I sell, these really nice, high quality specialty teas, the way that they're made, they almost have, like a natural sweetness to them. So people are always very surprised because they do lack that bitterness.
So you're not fighting it as much if you're using these higher quality teas.
Exactly.
So when we're talking about kind of going down our line of true teas, we talked about white tea followed by green tea, and then talk to us about how those compare to black and oolong tea. So black tea is more oxidized more heavily than green tea, since green tea isn't really oxidized at all. And is oolong in the middle there?
That's right. So they actually call oolong the chameleon of the tea world because depending on how it's processed and how it's roasted, it can be very green in color, so very close to the green tea on the spectrum, or it can be very bold and very dark in color. So there is a wider spectrum of oolong teas in between green tea and black tea.
And from the antioxidant perspective, all of these, when we hear about the health benefits of tea and we say, okay, I want to get these health benefits of tea. I've been, I'm looking at getting these antioxidants. If you reach for white or green or oolong or black tea, all of these are going to have, somewhere on that spectrum of antioxidant density. And if you reach for herbal teas, however, they don't. And so these are the ones that herbal tea, herbal infusions, as Mimsie let me know, it's pronounced tisanes. You may see that on menus or coffee shops. These are the ones that are chamomile or peppermint tea. There's so many different versions: ginger tea, hibiscus tea, passion flower tea. There's definitely a benefit to these. And so we're not saying that these aren't good. And in fact, one of the things that I think is one of the biggest benefits of these is what you just said of, people's taste buds. A lot of times they're looking for something that's sweeter tasting, and they may find tea bitter or more astringent than what they're looking for. But if it's the passion fruit tea or berry tea or peppermint tea, this is something that they'll find really palatable. And I'll recommend to clients that when you're looking for a way to stay hydrated and we want to get more fluids in you and we want to, but they get burned out on water, instead of things that are artificially sweetened, like Crystal Light packets that are just artificial food dyes and artificial sweeteners that people add to their water bottle. I would much rather make a picture of this and use this as your quote water through the day. And because they have zero caffeine, so you're really just getting fluid here that is flavored. And so I think for that perspective, the fact that they are not true tea can be exactly the reason that from a flavor perspective, people can use them in place of something like these Crystal Light type flavor additions.
Absolutely. And, we talked a little bit briefly earlier about brewing tea and the vessels that you can use to brew tea. And so a lot of times when people think, brewing tea, they think of it as being something that can only be enjoyed hot. But, as the temperatures are getting warmer and we're craving something that's a bit more refreshing, all of these teas, regular, true teas, as well as herbal teas, can be brewed cold as well. So that's something to keep in mind.
And talk to us a little bit about the health benefits associated with different herbal teas. Hibiscus tea, for example, and a potential benefit on blood pressure. Again, knowing that all of these are, there may be a handful of studies that show, and it's going to vary person to person, but what are some of the more common ones that people are turning to some of these herbal teas for specific therapeutic benefits?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, hibiscus tea is an herbal tea that has been shown to reduce blood pressure. My mom in particular swears by drinking hibiscus tea. Just by incorporating, regular amounts of it into her diet, she's been able to cut back on a lot of her blood pressure medications. With all of the coronavirus anxiety that many of us are experiencing, teas, herbal teas such as lemongrass can have anti-anxiety effects. They're very calming and very warming. Chamomile, passion flower, these are great for sleep. So, a lot of people are beginning to look at herbal teas as natural remedies rather than having to take pills for certain conditions.
And something like peppermint tea, which can work well for an upset stomach. Even things like IBS, some people can benefit from peppermint tea.
Yeah,
fennel. And then there's a tea or ginger tea, of course, for like a morning sickness or indigestion. There's a tea by a company called Traditional Medicinals, and it's called throat coat tea. Mm-hmm. And that's something that before I'll take, and this may make you cringe because it comes in the bag and everything else that we just talked about what not to do. But before I would take any type of medication, if I have a sore throat, a cough, I'm drinking that throat coat tea because it does exactly that. And there's licorice in there in this tea, and there's slippery elm, and there's willow bark, and there's all these things in there that are very soothing to a cough, for example. And so again, that's not a true tea. It's all these different herbs in there, but it's very functional, at least for me in those.
For sure.
But yeah, so with herbal tea, it's not to say that, there's no benefit of these because they don't have antioxidants. Right. They don't have the antioxidants that these other teas have that we talked about. They also don't have caffeine, though. And they may be something that people can drink more of through the day, especially if they're having a hard time just drinking plain water. This can help out. And then earlier we talked too about, kind of what are you replacing it with? And so if you've been drinking an abundance of sugary drinks or artificially sweetened things that you're putting in your water or a bunch of coffee or whatever, and you're able to replace that with something like herbal tea, that's going to put you many, many steps ahead health-wise. So there's a lot that can be said for these herbal teas. And the last thing I think on that too is the ritual that goes around drinking any type of a tea and having that, that period of time that you're waiting for the tea to steep, and you're enjoying it, you're smelling it, you're having that aroma, you're sipping it, even if it's something that you're doing in the middle of a very busy day. Just those few moments of tuning in to that process can be relaxing and help our, have that health benefit from simply making us press pause for a few minutes.
Yes. I mean, for so many of us, our days just fly by. And a lot of times we don't even realize it. We leave to go to work, and then before we know it, the day is over. And just being able to take a few minutes to mindfully prepare tea and enjoy it. Because when you do prepare it, you take the time to focus on, getting the right water temperature and brewing it the appropriate time. And like you said, you're taking those moments to look at the color and smell the aroma and actually taste it. It does something to our minds where it just keeps us, I don't know, it calms us. It provides a bit of extra focus. It's a meditation of sorts.
So let me ask you this. You mentioned your mom is like a really avid drinker of hibiscus tea, but Gachi, you don't have a Gachi tea that's hibiscus, correct?
Correct.
So what do you have her do for her hibiscus tea? How does she get that fix?
So there's actually a organic farm that is located in Mississippi, and they do a really lovely hibiscus tea. And all of their growing practices are completely organic, which is, another thing that you want to look for when you're buying tea. And I do want to make an additional note on choosing organic teas. Just because a tea brand is not necessarily certified organic doesn't mean that the tea is not grown sustainably or organically as well. So, for example, a lot of the farmers that I work with, they are very small. They're family owned. And so they don't necessarily have the funds that they need to buy the certification.
Mm-hmm. It's $10,000+ to be certified.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And that's ridiculous. I think that same note carries over if you're at the farmer's market and you're looking at produce. It's almost never going to be certified organic, but they're using organic practices. What is the name of the farm, the hibiscus farm in Mississippi? Because we may have people asking, and I'll include it in our episode notes.
Sure. It's PJ Farm.
PJ Farm. Okay. Well,
and they do have an online shop. They sell at a lot of local farmers markets on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, but Great. They do have a shop where they sell their hibiscus tea.
Great. So if you're following in the path of Mimsie's mom, her daughter has a phenomenal tea company and she chooses to still do hibiscus, which you don't have yet, then we'll have that link. So if someone
working on it.
Yeah. Yes, that's how it always is with our parents. They were like, we've got all this and then you're doing this, but we can guide them so far.
That's right.
Talk to us about cooking with tea and kind of some of the creative things that you've seen chefs do, or things that are common in baking or sauces, all of this, how we can use tea.
Sure. So tea is becoming an increasingly popular ingredient in the food world. A lot of hotels are hiring certified tea sommeliers to help them pair tea with certain foods, but then also incorporate it into specific dishes. So I was watching an episode of what I believe was Chef's Table France on Netflix recently, and was really surprised to see that there is a restaurant in Paris, and every single item on their menu has some sort of tea that is a component of the dish, which I thought was really cool. Back in December, I worked with a James Beard nominated chef in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, to develop a really unique tea-inspired pairing. And so we chose a selection of Gachi's teas, and then he used those same teas as an ingredient in 4 different courses. And so he took one of my teas, it's called Holy Smoke. It's a Lapsang Souchong black tea, which is a smoked tea. And he actually used it to smoke duck. He used it as an ingredient. So it had this really incredible flavor component, smokiness, sort of a leathery, earthy flavor that was added to the duck. So it can be, tea is being an ingredient used in that way, but also for baking as well. If you ever get the chance to go to Japan, you'll find that tea is used in all kinds of things, from ice cream to cookies to even noodles. So matcha, of course, is probably the most common ingredient that's found in snacks and baked goods in Japan, but now, around the world as well. But other types, so genmai cha, which is a green tea blended with rice, hoji cha, which is a roasted green tea. So these are all becoming more popular flavors throughout the world, not just as a tea, but as a cooking ingredient as well.
And we'll actually, Mimsie has a couple of different links of really cool sweet and or savory ways to infuse recipes with tea. And so we'll link to at least one, maybe a couple of articles there that'll give our listeners some ideas too of like what we're talking about. Because it sounds, you don't have to be this like crazy talented chef in order to use these things in your dishes at home. You just kind of need to know how to do it. And so we'll include some links to give y'all some inspiration there. So Mimsie, is there anything else, any kind of final takeaways you would have for our listeners on the mindfulness of tea or the sourcing of it or the health benefits of tea?
So I guess it really just goes back to, don't be intimidated by tea. There's so many different types of teas that are out there. And when you really start getting into it, you're going to find all kinds of flavor notes and, different processing methods, and just don't be intimidated by it. Tea is so much fun. It's a great tool to inspire conversation among friends, among family. It's a wonderful tool to help you better connect with yourself and, stay focused as you need to. So just, don't be intimidated and don't be afraid to experiment, whether it's trying new flavors that you might not be used to or experimenting with cooking or making your own tea mocktails. It's fun. It's really fun.
I love it. And if you've been in a rut and you've been using the same type of tea, or you haven't been drinking tea at all, but this has you inspired, we'll link to Mimsie's website. As I mentioned, we'll have some of the recipes there that use tea. And we'll have some things on social for y'all as well to hopefully give you some inspiration and guide you down that path. So, well, thank you, Mimsie, so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Molly.
A huge thank you to Mimsie for joining us today. There's so much to learn about the world of tea. And as mentioned, I'll include the links that we mentioned in the show notes of this episode. And don't forget to use the promo code FUELED at gachitea.com for free shipping. Thank you all for listening. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.